I was 8 months pregnant when my husband knocked me to the kitchen floor. I remember the cold tile against my side. I remember thinking I had to stay awake. And I remember realizing, very clearly, that if I stayed with him, neither my baby nor I would survive. People always ask why I didn't leave sooner. They don't see how control starts quietly, how it disguises itself as love. This isn't a story about one bad night. It's about how I got there, and how I chose to live. What happened in my kitchen years later would nearly cost me my life. But to understand how I ended up there, you need to know how everything began. My name is Elaine Carter. I was 32 years old when I met my husband, Thomas, in the summer of 1989. At the time, I was working as a customer service representative at a regional credit union in Dayton, Ohio, still living with my widowed father in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city. Thomas was charming in a way that immediately made people feel safe. He worked as a financial analyst for a mid-sized logistics firm, always neatly dressed, always confident. When he asked me to dance at a community fundraiser, I remember thinking that he seemed steady, like someone who knew exactly where he was going in life. He told me I had a warm smile. He said I seemed different from other women he'd met. By the end of the evening, he asked for my number. My hands shook slightly as I gave it to him. Our relationship moved quickly. Thomas called every night. He planned thoughtful dates, quiet dinners, weekend drives, small surprises that made me feel chosen. He brought flowers to my father, fixed a broken cabinet in our apartment, and spoke about building a future as if it were already decided. Everyone liked him. My friends said I was lucky. My father said Thomas seemed dependable. I believed them. Within a year, we were engaged. Thomas insisted on a small wedding, saying big ceremonies were a waste of money. His mother, Helen, offered to help plan everything. She chose the venue. She chose the menu. She even had opinions about my dress. When I hesitated, Thomas squeezed my hand and whispered, "She just wants to help. Let's not start our marriage with conflict." So I stayed quiet. We were married in the fall of 1991 in a modest church ceremony followed by a reception at his mother's home. Helen gave a toast about how she had finally gained a daughter, though it sounded more like a reminder that I now belonged to her family. After the wedding, Thomas suggested we move into a house just a few blocks from his mother. "She's getting older," he said. "It makes sense." I agreed. I wanted to be a good wife. I wanted peace. The house never felt like mine. The first time I noticed something was wrong was about 6 months into our marriage. While Thomas was at work, I rearranged the living room. Nothing dramatic, just moving the sofa closer to the window, placing a lamp where the light felt warmer. I was proud of it. I thought he'd be pleased. When he came home and saw it, his expression changed. It wasn't anger at first. It was colder than that. "Who told you to move the furniture?" he asked. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. "I just thought it looked nicer this way." He stepped closer. "I didn't ask what you thought," he said quietly. "This is my house." The room felt suddenly smaller. He made me move everything back exactly the way it had been. He stood there the entire time, correcting me when something was even an inch off. When I finished, he smiled and asked what was for dinner. That night, I told myself it was stress. I told myself marriage required adjustment. I told myself I was being sensitive. I didn't realize then that this was the beginning, not of a marriage, but of control. And once it starts, it doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives slowly, quietly, disguised as love. After that night, things began to change, quietly, almost politely. Thomas never raised his voice at first. He didn't need to. Instead, he corrected me. If dinner was late, he'd glance at the clock and sigh. If the house wasn't spotless, he'd ask what I'd done all day. When I wore a new blouse to work, he frowned. "That's a little attention-seeking, don't you think?" I laughed it off. I always did. Soon, suggestions became expectations. He wanted to know who I spoke to at work, why I stayed late, why I needed to call my friends so often. "You're married now," he reminded me. Your priorities should change. So I stopped meeting my coworkers for lunch. I let phone calls go unanswered. I told my best friend I was just busy. Thomas began handling our finances to make things easier. My paycheck went into a joint account I rarely accessed. He gave me cash for groceries, asking for receipts when I came home. When I questioned it once, he smiled thinly. "Why are you acting defensive?" he said. "I'm taking care of us." I started doubting myself. Maybe this was what marriage looked like. Maybe independence was overrated. Maybe love meant compromise, even when it hurt. His mother visited often. Helen inspected the house like an auditor. She commented on my cooking, my posture, my tone of voice. Thomas never stopped her. Sometimes, he nodded along. "You're lucky Thomas is patient," she said once. Men don't usually tolerate disobedience. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't even know what she meant. The first time Thomas grabbed my arm, it wasn't hard. Just enough to leave fingerprints. I had questioned a bill he paid without telling me. He leaned close and whispered, "You don't challenge me." Then he let go and kissed my forehead. I stood there shaking while he walked away as if nothing had happened. That night, I cried quietly in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear. I didn't tell anyone, because admitting it out loud would have meant admitting the truth. That the man I married wasn't who I thought he was. And I wasn't ready for that yet. I found out I was pregnant in the spring of 1993. For a brief moment, I thought everything might change. When I showed Thomas the test, he stared at it for a long time without speaking. Then he smiled slowly and said, "Good. Now you'll have a reason to stay home." I told myself he was nervous. Men get nervous, people said. But pregnancy didn't soften him. It tightened his grip. He didn't want me working anymore. "It's not safe," he said. "You should rest." When I mentioned the bills, he reminded me he handled the money. When I said I wanted to keep my job, his jaw tightened. "You're being selfish," he said. "A good mother puts her child first." So I quit. Days became quiet and endless. Thomas didn't like visitors, especially my friends. He said too many opinions were bad for the baby. Phone calls made him uneasy. If I spoke to my father, he wanted to know exactly what we discussed. He began checking my body in ways that didn't feel caring. What I ate. How much weight I gained. How long I slept. If I disagreed, he accused me of endangering the baby. "You don't even know how to be a mother," he snapped once. I do. By the time I was 7 months pregnant, I barely recognized myself. I moved carefully. I spoke softly. I learned how to read the house the moment he walked in, the sound of his footsteps, the way he set down his keys. One evening, I forgot to thaw the chicken. It was a small mistake. A normal one. Thomas stared at the empty counter, then at me. "What have you been doing all day?" he asked. I tried to explain. I felt dizzy. My back hurt. The baby had been kicking nonstop. He stepped closer. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I needed to protect my stomach. That thought terrified me more than anything else. Afterward, he told me I was emotional. That pregnancy made women dramatic. That I shouldn't push him. I sat alone in the bedroom later, my hands resting over my belly, whispering apologies to a child who hadn't even been born yet. That was the moment I understood something I'd been avoiding. Being pregnant wasn't keeping me safe. It was trapping me. By the time I was 8 months pregnant, I lived in a constant state of alertness. I woke up before Thomas so the house would already be quiet. I kept meals simple so nothing could go wrong. I learned how to move without making noise. Still, it wasn't enough. That morning started like any other. Thomas left early, slamming the door harder than usual. I spent the day cleaning, folding baby clothes that still smelled like detergent, trying to convince myself that if everything looked perfect, the night would pass peacefully. He came home just after sunset. I knew something was wrong the moment I heard his keys hit the counter. He asked about a charge on the credit card. A small one. Groceries. I told him the truth. He didn't like my tone. The argument escalated quickly, not loud at first, but sharp. Accusations. Insults disguised as concern. He said I was careless, ungrateful, a burden. I backed toward the kitchen, one hand instinctively moving to my stomach. Don't turn away from me, he said. The next moments blurred together. I remember slipping. I remember the cold tile against my side. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I needed to stay conscious. When it was over, the house was silent except for my breathing. I was on the kitchen floor. I could feel something warm beneath me, and panic rushed in before pain did. My hands shook as I pressed them against my stomach, whispering my baby's name over and over even though I hadn't chosen one yet. Thomas stood frozen near the doorway. For a second, I thought he might help me. Instead, he said, "Look what you made me do." That was the moment something inside me shifted. Lying there, unable to stand, I understood a truth I had avoided for years. If I stayed, neither my child nor I would survive. I don't remember how long it took for help to arrive. I only remember the sound of sirens growing louder and the relief that came with knowing someone else was finally coming. I woke up under bright hospital lights. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, and my body felt heavy, distant, like it didn't fully belong to me anymore. Then I felt it. A small, steady movement beneath my hand. My baby was alive. A nurse noticed my eyes open and rushed over, speaking gently, telling me to stay calm. She explained that I'd lost blood but arrived in time. They were monitoring the baby closely. I kept nodding, afraid that if I spoke, I might fall apart. Later, a doctor told me I was lucky. Not in the casual way people use that word, but in the serious, measured way doctors do when they know how close things came. Thomas wasn't in the room. Instead, a woman introduced herself as a hospital social worker. She pulled a chair close to my bed and spoke softly, as if she already understood everything I hadn't said. "You're safe here," she told me. "But what happens next matters." That was the first time anyone had asked me what I wanted. I didn't answer right away. Years of fear don't disappear overnight. I worried about money, about where I would go, about what he might do if I left. I worried about raising a child alone, about being judged, about failing. But then I looked down at my stomach. And I thought about the kitchen floor, about how quiet the house had been, about how easily everything could have ended. "I can't go back," I said finally. My voice shook, but the words felt solid. "If I do, I won't survive." The social worker nodded. She didn't look surprised. Arrangements were made quickly. A private room. A different discharge time. A plan. For the first time in years, other people were watching the door so I didn't have to. Thomas called. Once. Twice. Again and again. I didn't answer. When I was discharged, I didn't go home. I left the hospital through a side entrance with a small bag of clothes and paperwork I didn't fully understand yet. A volunteer drove me to a safe place I had never imagined myself needing, but suddenly felt grateful existed. That night, lying in a narrow bed, listening to unfamiliar sounds, I placed both hands over my stomach and made a promise. No matter how hard it became, no matter how scared I felt, I would never let my child grow up believing this was love. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was choosing to live. My son was born 6 weeks later. Labor was long and exhausting, but when I finally heard his cry, something inside me broke open in the best possible way. I held him against my chest and realized that, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was afraid of the past. Thomas never came to the hospital. Through a legal advocate, I learned he had been questioned and later charged. I won't pretend the process was easy. Court dates, paperwork, fear that never fully disappeared. But each step forward mattered. I named my son Evan. We stayed in transitional housing for several months. The room was small. The walls were plain. But it was quiet. No shouting. No footsteps I had to memorize. At night, I rocked Evan to sleep and whispered promises I intended to keep. I went back to work when I could. I took classes when Evan slept. I learned how to manage money again. How to make decisions without asking permission. How to trust my instincts, something I had been taught to ignore for years. Some days were painfully hard, but they were mine. Years passed. Evan grew into a gentle, observant child. He asked questions. He laughed easily. And one day, when he was old enough, I told him the truth, not every detail, but enough. I told him that love should never make you afraid. That respect is not negotiable. That kindness and control can never exist in the same place. Today, I live in a small home filled with light. I drink my coffee slowly in the mornings. I keep my doors locked, but my heart open. I still carry scars, some visible, most not, but they no longer define me. I tell this story because I once believed silence was strength. It isn't. Leaving was. If you're watching this and something feels familiar, if you're making excuses for fear or waiting for things to get better, please know this. You are not weak. You are not alone. And it is never too late to choose yourself. I did. And it saved my life.